All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Crystal VanKooten. I'm an assistant professor of writing and rhetoric at Oakland University, and I'm very excited to be here today to talk with you about digital rhetoric and methods and methodologies. Thank you to Justin and Scott for inviting me. I'd just like to say I did post to my blog the transcript of my talk and my slides, and also a short annotated bibliography of some methodological sources. So if you'd like to read along with me, if that would help you, you can find that at crystalvk.wordpress.com. And I also tweeted about it this morning with the hashtag, so you can find it there also. So today my talk is called Methodologies for Research in Digital Rhetoric, a survey of an emerging field. And I want to start with the question, what is methodology? And I'm starting here because it's something that I've really been thinking a lot about lately as I consider my own research trajectory as an assistant professor of writing and rhetoric, as a composer myself of multimodal video texts, as a teacher who asks students, like many of us do, to compose digital texts that are things like podcasts and videos and images and written essays, as a digital rhetorician, so I would call myself that, and as a digital writing researcher. So our approaches to methodology and our research methods themselves shape how we might observe and analyze texts and observe and analyze acts of composition and learning. Our methods affect what new knowledge we are able to make. In their 2012 article, Times, Lives, and Videotape, literacy researchers Bob Halberter and Julie Lindquist describe methodology as a way of imagining inquiries into particular questions. So methodology is the big picture of how we theorize and frame our research, and then it encompasses the systems that inform particular research practices, which those are the research methods themselves. So those methods, the particular practices for Halberter and Lindquist, are examples of what they call local processes. Methodologies are examples of global operations. Digital humanist Tom Scheinfeld has talked about what he calls the seasonal shifting between methodological and theoretical work in fields as they emerge over time. So DH scholars, digital humanities scholars, he points out, quote, traffic less in new theories than in new methods, end quote. So they're playing with digital materials, techniques, and modes. So my questions begin with, are we in digital rhetoric in a similar place of methodological experimentation? What are the global operations, the methodologies of digital rhetoric? And subsequently, what are then the local processes that we're using to enact our methodologies? And then third, when we begin to take stock of methodologies and methods of digital rhetoric, how might considering these operations and these processes help us to then do the work of defining what digital rhetoric is as an emerging field, which is the impetus for the symposium this weekend. So I started my inquiry into methodologies and methods for digital rhetoric by mapping out some of the questions that I had when I thought about, okay, here's digital rhetoric, here's research. And you can see my questions here on the screen. And it actually started because a colleague of mine from graduate school asked me, what methodologies do they use over there in digital rhetoric? And I, was like, I don't know how to answer that question very well. And so I started writing down some of my questions. So my first one was, what are we actually using for inquiry? And then I moved into questioning how what we're using informs our identity as a field, how we're drawing from other fields, and if we can distinguish ourselves from sister fields like the digital humanities and rhetoric and composition. So to begin answering these questions, and for my talk today, I decided to turn to our work, so to the work of all the people in the room right now, to the work of those presenting this weekend at the symposium. So I decided to treat the work of the 30 speakers that we're going to hear this weekend as a kind of a case study. And this can be one site that could then potentially speak to how we're defining and enacting methodologies and methods for digital rhetoric. So what was my method for looking at and classifying our collective work? Let me give you a brief description. I examined the content of our presentations this weekend as represented in our symposium abstracts, asking questions about what methodologies and methods I could observe being used there. And so here you can see a Wordle composed from the text of our abstracts. Then I supplemented the information from the abstracts with other descriptions of our scholarship and our research that I could find on the web, and also via a library database search. So basically, I Googled everyone, and I read through what I found, which included professional and school-based websites, CVs that were posted online, academia.edu profiles, and other similar online profiles. And I even looked at some people's Facebook and Twitter profiles. So in other words, I have been stalking everyone on the internet. And as a side note, I really feel like I sort of got to know a lot of you through your online work. And I know a lot more about your work than I did before I did this project. So that's exciting. And I want to meet all of you in person and talk about your wonderful work. So I probably know your article title, which, you know, that's fabulous. So anyway, online, some of you talked directly about a methodological orientation for your research, and others of you did not do that. So when I needed to, I intuited a methodological stance based on what I could find and read. And I also looked up books and articles and scanned abstracts for those, for things that have been published by us. So after examining and taking notes on that data set, then I then wrote up a sentence or two for each presenter that described his or her methodological approach to research, and then I grouped everybody's work with other similar work. So here are the results. This chart, which is, whoa, very large, represents the first major category that fit actually most of the speakers here this weekend. So this is 21 people out of the 30 that are speaking. And I've labeled this category theory building through analysis of written and digital or material texts. And I've organized the table, as you can see, with the scholar or the researcher listed on the left-hand side and the sites of analysis that they're using to build theory on the right. All 21 scholars draw both on written theories, most notably, as you can see, on rhetorical theory, along with drawing on analysis of digital or material texts. So many of us are what I would call theorists of digital rhetoric, weaving together written texts and analyzing digital texts to theorize about how these texts communicate, and also about the practices that users and authors participate in when they're composing or consuming digital text. As you can also see in the table, we're drawing most often from rhetorical theory, as I already mentioned, but also at times from composition theory, philosophy, social theory, and law writing to articulate our own theories. And if you look on the right-hand side, when you consider the digital material sites of analysis, we see quite a range. So we're looking closely at social networking sites and activities on Twitter, on Facebook, and on other online forums. We're looking at web pages, algorithms, and to the code behind the web pages. We're looking to mobile, interactive, and GPS software applications and devices. We're looking to photography, architecture, and sound art. And even in a few cases, we're looking at historical text. Our sites of analysis for theory building then are pretty diverse, but I think they're all linked to how digital texts communicate to authors and audiences through the web, through mobile devices, through images, structures, and sounds. So 70% of us are doing this kind of theory building work using digital text as examples. The second methodological category that came to the fore in this case study is the composition of digital products themselves as the method of inquiry. So as you can see here, there were 7 examples of scholars and researchers that were composing text in various digital formats beyond just a written article or a traditional book format. And the formats, as you can see, include documentary and performative video scholarship, audio compositions, digital sculpture, repurposing of digital objects in new ways. And as a side note, I think there might be more people in the room that are doing this kind of digital composition work. However, I went off of what I could actually find in the abstracts and also when I looked online at your work. And so notably, I thought 5 out of these 7 examples are actually linked to video composition and production. And I think this is perhaps in part because video composition hardware and software has become much more accessible, especially in the last 10 years, last decade. So you no longer actually need a fancy lab or specialized equipment to experiment and compose with video. So a lot of us are picking up that work. Even so, this is only 23% of us that are doing the work of digital composition in highly visible ways. So in 2004, which is 11 years ago, computers and writing scholar Cheryl Ball stated that, quote, composition and new media scholars write about how readers can make meaning from images, typefaces, videos, animations, and sounds, but most scholars don't compose with these media. It's evident from the scholarship available that compositionists are interested in new media, yet they do not seem to value creating new media texts for scholarly publications to explore the multimodal capabilities of new technologies, end quote. So it seems to me that based on my case study, Ball could actually be talking to us today, digital rhetoricians in 2015. Composing digital products as academics, though, as we all know, is complicated and complex. There are tenure requirements. There's the kinds of texts that our journals solicit and will publish for us. There's the learning curve for trying to do something new that we weren't trained to do or didn't learn how to do in school. There's often a bias against multimodal scholarship and in favor of written scholarship. But along with Ball, I'd like to call all of us to continue enacting our scholarship through digital composition, to use composing with multiple and digital modes of expression as a method of inquiry into how digital texts communicate. I think we need to be doing more of this. So third, 7 of us are also doing empirical observational work of others' experiences with digital text and digital composition. The various empirical methods we're using, as you can see, include observation and analysis of classroom experiences, corpus analysis, discourse analysis, and also ethnography. The use of empirical methodologies for digital rhetoric parallels a turn to methodological diversification that has been occurring in rhetoric and composition more broadly, I think, over the past few decades. So Gisa Kirsch has written in 2012 that in writing studies, quote, no longer do scholars apologize for using, adapting, or borrowing methods that originated in the social sciences. But instead, writing researchers are now offering critiques and insights and explanations and arguments for new kinds of hybrid methodologies and methods for research. Empirical research in Rhet Comp has become more and more common and more rigorous in the past few years. In 1996, though, computers and writing scholar Scott DeWitt pointed out the dearth of empirical research that addressed what was then called hypertext and composing practices together. So 19 years ago, this is DeWitt's writing, he wrote, quote, we see only a sparse tendency towards carefully designed empirical research studies, where research questions and research methodologies are explicitly stated and collected data analyzed, as well as where student experiences are revealed and pedagogical agendas exposed, end quote. So again, it strikes me that DeWitt could still be making these same comments today to us, the digital rhetoricians, 19 years later, as I think my case study illustrates in part. So while some of our work in digital rhetoric parallels the turn to empirical research in Rhet Comp more broadly, I think we need more carefully designed empirical studies specifically on digital composition and on rhetorical expression in digital spaces, on the uses of technologies inside and outside of schools, and on the teaching of digital rhetoric so that our theories and our practices can move beyond the anecdotal. We need to be looking systematically across multiple experiences with digital text, and we need to be clear about how and why we're choosing our sites of inquiry and our methods. So fourth, the final notable category was definitional work. And 2 of us are doing this work, and we've heard from them both already. So this is Ayman and Losh, and both in their books, they give definitions of digital rhetoric. So Ayman actually turns to definitions through examining pedagogical materials, including course descriptions, syllabi, and case studies. Losh in virtual politics explores the 4 areas of digital rhetoric that have been mentioned already: digital genres, public rhetoric, the emerging discipline of digital rhetoric, and then mathematical theories from information science. And both Ayman and Losh are inviting us to extend our inquiries in new ways. So they're calling us to look to the pedagogical, to public discourse, and to information science to extend our definitions of who we are and what we're doing. So far, what I've presented so far is a summary of what we're doing. In answer to my first question, what methodologies and methods are we using? And to summarize, as you can see in the pie chart, most of us are theorizing digital rhetoric, discussing how digital texts communicate, that's the big giant blue, drawing on rhetorical or other written theories and analysis of digital texts themselves. Some of us are composing new kinds of text, that's the red. Others are using qualitative and empirical methodologies to begin more systematically inquiring into how we communicate and persuade with digital technologies. And a few of us are defining, that's the purple. So now I'd like to turn briefly to my 3 other research questions in the few minutes I have left. Are we drawing from other fields? And if so, what fields? How do these methodologies that we're using shape our identity as an emerging field? And are we different from our sister fields? And if so, how? So as you can see in this table, most of us are drawing on rhetorical theory for our research, which is what I mentioned before. 19 of us are doing so directly, but we do have voices from other fields in the mix, as you can see here, from composition, from philosophy, communication, programming, architecture, law, just to name a few of them. In this way, perhaps digital rhetoric might be headed in a similar direction as the digital humanities. So Matthew Kirschenbaum has explained that DH projects are interdisciplinary and collaborative at their core, and they depend on networks of people that aren't usually from the same discipline. So our work this weekend shows some movement in such a collaborative, cross-disciplinary direction, I would say. Some of our work is already collaborative, and some of our work relies on knowledge not only from rhetoric, but from other fields and disciplines as well. So this graphic here represents how this case study has helped me to think about our relationships to our sister fields. I think our work may be heading toward a methodological experimentation with digital tools phase, like several people have said is happening in the digital humanities. And I think we are also moving toward interdisciplinary work, as is more common in DH. From rhetoric and composition, we're bringing a recently developed openness to new and diverse research methods. But what makes us really unique, and I think the study highlights very well, is our strong foundation in rhetorical theory, which speaks to how and why we might compose and experiment with methods and with new tools so we can use the theory to prop us up, if you will, and have rationales for why we're doing what we're doing. So in summary, using the work of using all of our work as a case study, I think reveals that our methodologies and methods for digital rhetoric, both the global operations and the local processes of what we're doing, I would characterize them as in flux and as yet emerging. Many of us are theory building through analysis of digital examples, and this aligns us with more traditional methodologies within the humanities and within English departments. Some of us are beginning to compose digital products, to design new methods for observation and data collection in digital spaces, and to draw on fields outside of rhetoric and writing that have built knowledge about the digital. And this movement mirrors the current methodological experimentation phase of the digital humanities, which I would say looks across disciplinary boundaries more readily. These new methodological movements for digital rhetoric are really exciting, but I think they're taking us into somewhat unfamiliar spaces, and these spaces are populated by colleagues from the learning and the social sciences, for example, from cinema studies, from information science. I, though, am very excited to see where we might go from here, to see who we might work with and what we might make and compose next, and to see new and assembled methodologies and methods come to fruition as we learn more about how digital texts are composed and consumed. Thank you very much.